Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Andy Ellis. Andy, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat. I followed you for a long time in my career in cybersecurity. Folks like you and Gary and other, like I said, titans of the industry. I think who've wore many hats from being in the military, being practitioners on the industry side of things, being investors, advisors, you name it. But for folks that don't know Andy Ellis, can you tell us a little bit about your background and some of what you've done?
Sure. So I actually started my cyber career in the U.S. Air Force. I did information warfare, which is what we called it in the last millennium, for Central Command. After leaving there, I was at Akamai for 20 years, where I was sort of the first security hire, chief security architect, chief security officer, helped build out the security product line. So, taking a $1 billion infrastructure company and adding, now $2 billion of security revenue on top of that. Then I spent 4 years in the VC world. So as a operating partner and then partner at YL Ventures. And now I'm on my own doing value-add advising and consulting with both CISOs and security vendors.
Yeah, as you were saying that in terms of the Akamai piece, it made me think of another industry leader like Rick Howard, someone who spent a lot of time at an early, industry titan, company who's now, a Palo Alto, you name it, like these people who defined our industry. So you guys have very similar backgrounds, and that's amazing. I was going to ask you, as you've transitioned from practitioner, military, operator, practitioner, investor, advisor, et cetera, like how has your time as a longtime security leader helped you when you transition to becoming an investor or advisor? And I ask that because I feel like a lot of CISOs, are now starting to look for, you can call it an exit ramp, right? Like what comes after being a CISO? Some of them are moving into venture capital, right? Some are moving into doing advisory type work. Like how do you find your time in the field of cybersecurity helped you, or maybe even gave you an advantage over some investors who didn't have that background,
Yeah. So definitely there's an advantage in that you have relevant experience, right? You can put yourself in the shoes of the buyer when you're trying to talk to a seller. Although I've seen interesting arguments about that one. But I think that the most valuable thing I got out of it was about halfway through my career, I had this realization, I think it's one every CISO needs to come to, which is you get paid by the people that you are telling no to. And if you think your job is to tell them no, you've got it all wrong, right? Your job is to help them make more money. Now, you want to do that in wiser and safer ways, not safe ways. There's no safe way to make money. I guess safest is, go get a minimum wage job at Whole Foods. That's about it. But I go talk to them and they don't think that's very safe by comparison either. So you have to recognize that your job is not just what you hold sacred. It's what everybody around you does. And once you realize that, then as you go to make the transition, now you say, okay, what is the new North Star? Like, oh, if I'm in the VC world, what's our job? Our job is to invest money that's going to bring a return to our LPs, right? And the job is not actually to build successful companies. That's the easiest way to do it, just to be very clear. Like you want to build a successful company, but I know a lot of founders who run into this tension because they're like, well, I want to go IPO, and their VC's like, no, you need to sell the company. Because I'm going to get a 5x return if you sell the company right now. But if you try to go IPO, you may fail in the next 5 years and I'm out all my money. So either find another investor to buy me out or sell the business. And that creates a point of tension. And if you're on the VC side of that equation, you're going to have to figure out, how do I deal with stakeholders who have completely divergent goals?
Yeah, you said something there that made me think of an article I wrote. I think I call it like cybersecurity's delusion problem. And it's because in cyber, I feel like, and I've seen this throughout my career with a lot of leaders and myself throughout my career, and you get frustrated, right? It's like cyber is the center of the universe to us. It's like, well, what do you mean we can't fix this XYZ, vulnerability or whatever? It's like the business has other priorities.
Yeah.
And cybersecurity is not number one most of the time. I think cybersecurity practitioners really struggle with that. Like as you've worked and coached and mentored and stuff throughout your career and even your own self, like how have you kind of come to that realization, like, okay, the business has a purpose that's not just cybersecurity. How do I get behind that? And how do I effectively support that?
Yeah. Well, if I had it on the bright side, I was a CTO as well. Like I was acting as the CTO for a business unit that didn't exist, that, once we were making, over $100 million in revenue, just directly attributed, all of a sudden they're like, ooh, we need to go hire professionals to do this. But like, that was part of my job, was go make money for the business. But where it was really telling was I was one of the first CISOs I knew to be doing a quarterly board briefing. Like the audit committee, every quarter, I was on their agenda. And this was I want to say almost 15 years ago. Right, which is really sort of unheard of at the time. Like it was this annual thing. The security person came in, they gave a briefing, and everybody just sort of zoned out. And every CISO hated it. They're like, "How do I get them engaged? How do I get them engaged?" And I was in the board for like almost 2 years before I said to the assistant general counsel who sort of ran everything, I said, "Can I just stay in the audit committee meeting because after I do my presentation?" And he was like, "That's weird, but let me go see." So and they negotiate. And I just got to sit there and listen to everything else they were doing. Right. And I think most CISOs don't do that. So to them, like, well, this is the only thing the board does is I come in, I brief them, I leave. Clearly, they don't do anything else. And when you listen to the way they engage with every other professional and how everybody else is sort of presenting to them, you realize the board is not an operational function. Right. The board is there to basically say, actually, I say it's two things that a board does in a public company, three in a private company, right? In a public company, one is ensure CEO succession, right? Who is the next CEO is number one thing a board needs to worry about. Too many public company boards are not doing that. Then the second thing is, does the CEO manage the company well? That's it. Right? Does the CEO, like their governance role is not governance of every function, it's governance of the CEO's governance. And so your job as a CISO is to walk in and basically say, CEO's got it covered. They've got me. Here's what we're doing. Here's some things you just need to be aware of, and I'm out of here. I'm not asking you for money. I'm not coming in asking you to reprioritize things, because the moment I do, what I'm saying is the CEO is incapable of doing their job. That's a problem. Now, there are ways that you do it. Just to be clear, if you're a CISO listening to this, you're like, oh, I can't use the board. No, you use the board as a threat. What you do is you prepare your first set of slides. You go to the CEO and your peers, and you say, well, if we don't prioritize this, here's the message I have to give the board, which is a bad message. So let's fix this. Right? But you're never going with a bad message to the board unless you really have no choice, at which point it is a career limiting move. You will not be employed by that company in a year, or maybe not by that CEO. One of the two of you is going, and it's probably going to be you. In a private, early stage startup, like your other thing is make sure the company doesn't die, right? Because it is on a limited runway. Like, exactly the day you're out of money. And so that becomes your third, rail that you're focused on is, how do we not die? We need to get more money. Is that revenue coming up? Is that cost going down? Is that outside money coming in? Those are the three levers you're going to then worry about. But that's it. That's all a board is doing. So if you're a CISO and you come in and you think cybersecurity is number one, no, it's not. All that matters about cybersecurity is the CEO did the right things.
Yeah, I could see that being a point of tension if you don't position the CEO to look good, essentially, in front of the board and show that they're being effective in their role. It's going to cause an inevitable tension, right, between you and the CEO, who you report to, which is going to cause downstream challenges.
Right.
In
And
your
if you're
day-to-day
lucky,
operations.
you report to the CEO. Probably you report to somebody who reports to the CEO. So if you make the CEO look bad, it is not that you and the CEO are going to have a conversation. It's that the CEO is going to tell your boss that you're an F up. And now your boss, who may not have even been in the room, is the one who's going to have a conversation with you, except it's really a monologue. It's pointed in one direction.
Yeah. It's often, you almost open a can of worms with like who the CISO should report to. And there's all these age-old arguments like CTO, CEO, et cetera, like, that kind of thing. And I'm going to keep us from going down the rabbit hole too much, unless you have some thoughts you want to share on that one.
I mean, the real simple one is the CISO is only half of a C-level role. The fact that we expect it to report to the CEO is part of the problem. It's not, in most companies, a true C-level role. Either you are also the CIO, in which case you're a C-level, or you're also a CTO. But if you are just a CISO, you're not really a C-level executive. Like, you are a important stakeholder, but you're probably not in the CEO's regular staff meeting because you're not bringing value. You're just doing maintenance on this security program.
You also said something that I want to ask a follow-up question on. You talked about in the early stage startup, the role of the CISO is, essentially, what your runway looks like, when you can
What's the
run
role
out
of the board
money.
member?
Yeah.
I would love that to be the role of the CISO. Most early stages don't even have a CISO.
Well, I was going to ask that, so we often hear the phrase like security is a business enabler, right? We have these catchphrases that we say that make us feel good in cybersecurity. And that's one of them. And I've been arguing, I'm curious your perspective that, one of the best ways CISOs or security leaders could be a business enabler, especially for like a younger, immature company, comes to compliance. Because people are often like, do you have a SOC 2? Do you have a FedRAMP? Do you have an XYZ, right? And that's one of the most tangible, direct ways to show we're leading to revenue and business opportunities, market entrance, et cetera. Like, what are your thoughts around, like, cybersecurity kind of directly contributing to business opportunity in that way?
So I think that compliance is a product requirement. It's not a security requirement. And if you're the CISO, might be the product manager for compliance. And great, then you are contributing to revenue. But the big challenge is you will now get that confused with actual risk management. Right? You do compliance not because of risk, other than risk of not being able to sell. That's it. Like, and you should accept that. And the reason why this is really important is there are stupid things in almost every compliance regime. Right? Your company will be told, go do X, and no sane human will look at X for your business and think that that has anything to do with security or will improve anything. And if you're the CISO and you walk in and say, we have to do X because of security, you have now undercut every single security requirement you're going to bring in the future. If instead you say, look, it is very important to us that we have a SOC 2, that we are PCI compliant, HIPAA, whatever, you name it, because we want to sell to that business line, and we have to do X because the auditors will fail us if we don't do X. Yes, the auditors are stupid. This is the cheapest way for us to do X. Right? And I'll give you my example. So security awareness training. Look, I think that this like everybody in the company has to do security awareness training once a year is one of the stupidest requirements ever. I love security awareness. If you want to think about risk management, it always starts with awareness and people's models. But what we actually ended up doing is doing really awful trainings. And it was the same one every year. So we waste people's time. And I looked at this, and this was during one of the downturns, and my security team at Akamai was 3 people. And I'm like, oh my God, I have to do security awareness training with 3 people. And at the time there were 1,100 employees. Right. So even if you use like, oh, you should be 1% of the business. No, I'm not, it wasn't even 1%. Like, I am a third of that. How am I going to do security awareness training? Because I was doing the math. I'm like, this is insane. Just like to try to keep track of everybody. And so I wrote a cron job on top of a very lightweight web app. Right, PHP on top of a database, and it was MySQL, so standard a traditional LAMP app back in the day. And basically, the cron job every Monday went and looked in the database and said, "Oh, look, you're an employee. You have not done security awareness training in 11 months." It would send you a notice and say, "You have to do security awareness training. Here's the link for it." And at a year, it would CC your manager and say, "You missed your do it within the year. Come do it." When you clicked on the link, you got a web page that was carefully designed to fit on one window. Like our standard monitors, the type was set that you did not have to scroll on this page at all. And it said, security is important to us. We have customers who are financial services, credit card, healthcare, et cetera. Here's the things we care about. If you want to know more, here's a PowerPoint presentation you can go to. Here's our entire security program. It's like 800 pages. If you're stupid and want to go read it, you can, but I'm not going to force you to. But what I need you to do is acknowledge that you have security responsibilities, that you'll pay attention to security, and click this button to say, I trained you. Right? It took people, I actually did measure like time from page load to click for repeat employees was like 30 seconds. So I took what would be an hour requirement plus overhead and dropped it to 30 seconds. I saved an FTE by doing that. And it was very obvious to everybody in the business that I'm like, look, I got to check the box. Everybody has to come and click this link. I'm making it as cheap as possible. Now I did custom security training on top of it. Now I could come in and go to, executive assistants and say, here's the training you need. I could go talk to customer care. I could go talk to anybody. And they said, oh, you're the guy who doesn't waste my time with stupid computer-based training. Because our lawyers would bring in training like code of ethics, et cetera. And it was Flash apps. We're trying to get rid of Flash. And the only Flash we have is legal compliance. Then it's like, oh, if you lose window focus, it stops playing. So you have to keep this, Windows front and center. You can't work on something else. So people would demand second machines from IT so that like the 3 times a year they were doing training, they could have a machine doing the training that had window focus while they're off working on code, right? How much energy and how much importance did we lose because we treated compliance like security? And I know I'm really far afield from like, how do you create business value? This is how you create business value. How do you build an operational machine that does not distract from the company making money? That's step 1. Step 2 are there ways that you can make it faster for the company to make money? But first, stop distracting.
I love that reframing of distracting because it kind of takes a sense of swallowing our ego, right? Like you're saying, hey, look, this isn't the most important thing. How can I get people back to doing what's most important for the business? And that's hard to do sometimes because it's hard to swallow our ego in that sense. And you just made me think, this is probably precedes your time in the military, but man, the military cyber awareness training, we'd have these 2D videos and you have to click through and I just mute it and let it play and then click when it was done playing and
exactly
stuff like that. Yeah, it's so brutal. But, I know you recently transitioned too from, your role that you were at to a new role where you're helping go to market and sales team and, focusing on being more effective and things like that. Before we dive into some of the specifics, I wanted to ask you, as your time in as an investor advisor, you saw a lot of startups, a lot of teams out there, they'd scale, they'd grow. What were some of the things that you saw some of the best go-to-market and sales teams do, and then some of the most, egregious missteps, for example?
So it's going to be funny because it's almost actually the same thing, which is have the courage of your convictions. When your convictions are right, you're going to succeed amazingly. When they're wrong, you're going to fail miserably. Right. And the question that you have to have is, do you know why you have the courage? Like I've seen people who are like, look, I'm going to do a campaign. It's going to take a year to bear fruit. And I know it will take a year. And I've got a bookmark in a year. This is what I expect to see. And in a sense, you will always be successful with that. Even if your program itself is failing, to stop and look and say, oh, I expected it to succeed. I'm not seeing success now. Right. And I'm thinking, one of the companies that was in my portfolio, Cycode, the CMO there is like, look, we're going to build authority. Our goal is we're going to build content that is unique, that is interesting, because we think the way the search engines are going, that's going to be really critical. And the best part is the CMO didn't actually even tell everybody he was doing it. He just starts doing this. But so we see big brand things. Oh, they write an ebook, they do this, they do that. And then one board meeting, he walks in and he's like, look, 50% of our revenue is sales initiated, 50% is marketing initiated. And of the 50% that's marketing initiated, half of that is direct. Somebody came to us. We did not have them in our database. We don't even know if it came through search because of the way search now, functions. But that's my success number because I built authority. 25% of our revenue is the product of this work that I can't otherwise measure. Boom. Amazing success. Like Ronan did an amazing job there. Now, flip side, I've seen CMOs who are just like, I have my way that I'm going to do it. And they can never really crystallize it. And they sort of, they never hear that this isn't working and they need to try something different. What they do is they say, well, it's not working because of this person on my team, so I'll get rid of them. And then, 3 months later, they get rid of somebody else. And so there's always sort of throwing somebody else under the bus. And at the end of the day, as a CMO, go to market, like you own it. If you had a bad team, you hired that bad team or you kept that bad team. So I'm kind of not sympathetic to your team is the reason you're not executing well.
Yeah, I really like where you're going with that because I know I'm going to ask you later on, like you're a big proponent of leadership. And I think what you're speaking there is ownership and accountability, like taking responsibility for the team or the function that you lead rather than shirking that onto others and saying, hey, it didn't work because of so-and-so or it didn't work. Like you ultimately have to own that.
Right.
And that's part of being an effective leader in any role, marketing, sales, security, whatever the capacity is. Essentially.
Yeah. Like I knew a CMO who everybody around them said, like, this person who's basically your second in command is a disaster. You have to get rid of them. And it took them over a year to do so. And in that year, they lost a bunch of great contributors, like a bunch of things went down. And now the CMO was like, well, we had issues. And I'm like, your issue was your person. Like, I don't know that it would have been better. Like there were market dynamics as well. But yeah, like they had this courage that they could make this person work. And they just dragged things out. And sometimes you got to say, look, we're going to have a breakup. We might as well just have it today rather than 6 months from now.
Yeah, you're holding on to that is, especially where you have finite capital, like you're burning limited time, limited time you have to work. And that was going to something I wanted to ask you as well. You talked about the concept of runway earlier. And I know you've worked with a lot of early stage startups and they grow and they scale, they raise subsequent rounds, et cetera, but they have finite capital. And there's kind of always a balance, at least, from what I've seen of between product and then sales. And like they're scaling those two different functions and different velocities. What are your thoughts on like scaling the two concurrently? Some people, I feel like they go out and they build brand authority and expertise and in thought leadership, but they don't have a product, or they build an amazing product, but no one knows it even exists, right? Like they have no brand or awareness. And some thread the needle really well. Like, what are your thoughts on the balance between those two?
So I think you have to understand that like the mental models that you have as a public company who's got, profit, is very different than the mental models a startup has to have, right? And I like to equate it's the difference between vampires and zombies. I love dark fantasy of all sorts and horror fantasy, right? Vampires are immortal. And so when we see vampires, there's always these like vampire covens and these houses, and they're fantastically wealthy. Why? Because vampires are immortal and they hide in the shadows. Why don't humans know that vampires exist? Because all it takes is for you to realize that you have a vampire infestation and no more vampires. Like, we'll go kill them all. Zombies, on the other hand, are the exact opposite, right? They're the undead, which does not mean they're not dying. It means they're already like so dead that they've got a problem. Like if they don't get brains tomorrow, they're screwed, right? So a public company acts like a vampire, very risk averse. Startup needs to act like a zombie. Go get brains, even if you hurt yourself, because if you don't get that income, you're not getting your next cash infusion. And so as you try to approach this, you can't do the model like if I'm a big public company, I want to invest a lot in my brand because every little bit on the brand, that's the flywheel that's going to keep on giving me for a long time. I want a lot of thought leadership that's out there. If I'm a tiny startup, I still want some of that, but I have to be able to equate that to like, where is that turning into revenue? How am I going to do that? Now, I can over pivot. And the one challenge that I see right now is a lot of CISOs like, oh, I want to go like be a field CISO and go do brand work for a startup. And the startup's like, oh, you're a field CISO. You're my first door sales rep. Like you open the door so my professionals can come in and sell, but your job is to bring in revenue. That's like over pivoting on the like, I must feed too much. So the way you need to thread that needle is really say, if you're going to have a brand person, how are you monetizing this? And this is the advice I give out to every one of my clients, and I'll give it to free for everybody who's listening here, which is if you have a brand person, a field CISO, even if they're a director who's out going to go speak for you, who do you have following them around to turn that into revenue? Like I have done this for companies where I'm going speaking at a conference on your behalf, and there's nobody from your company in the room. People come up and talk to me afterwards. There's nobody taking notes. Right? You are missing out on this amazing opportunity. And I blame HubSpot and all of its competitors for this because we think that pipeline is a database. And it is not a database. It's a living, breathing ecosystem. It's cultivation, right? It's like gardening. You don't like manage your garden by writing down checkpoints of when you will walk out and look at your garden. You look at your garden every day. And if there's weeds, you pull them up. And you might say, look, every week I'm going to go out and spend an hour doing basic maintenance, but every day you have to interact with it. And so if you have brand activities, how are you weaponizing and monetizing those? You know, if you're publishing content, how are you making sure you get all of the clicks, that you're, doing residuals on it to keep drawing people back to it? But where's your CTA that someone says, oh, I saw this content, I can do a thing with it. You get a person at a conference. Like I always said, give me a lead gen person. Give me the most junior person in the company. That's great. When I go speak at a conference, I want them sitting in the front row. They can take the pictures, send them to the social media team. But as soon as I'm done talking, they're going to come up and stand next to me with a notepad. And when somebody walks up and asks me a question, they read the person's badge and they write down what the question was and who the person was and make sure they get a personalized follow-up. Because even if only 1 in 5 of those turns into a lead, that is way better, especially because they get to follow up and say, hey, you came up, you asked Andy this specific question, and I was there. Like what I get to, like I was at Black Hat, and I got like 5 vendors who are sending me email. They're like, oh, we talked at Black Hat. And I'm like, no, we didn't. Like, you think I talked to enough people that you can pretend that we had a conversation. I know exactly who I talked to. You were not one of them. Right? If you speak to somebody talks to your brand, you should follow up with that knowledge, not just with, and on the flip side, I have people who are sending me mail that I talked to a founder, but somebody at their booth scanned my badge and is now sending me generic follow-up. And I'm like, you're missing the opportunity here. Like, be personal because you're small and agile. You can do that.
Yeah, I feel like to your point there, leaving so much opportunity on the table because these go-to-market sales folks are often looking to see what's their most, present, pain point or where they really care about. And that's coming through in those questions, in those conversations. If no one's there to collect that, you're leaving that on the table.
Right. Well, and for me, the funniest is where it was a conversation that I had where I was pitching my services to like the CMO at the booth. And then I'm getting a sales rep saying, oh, you came and you wanted a demo. And I'm like, that was not the conversation that we had. But by the way, clearly you need to come to my seminar on how to engage with CISO buyers. And I send them a link to it.
Yeah, you actually teed up my next question so well. I don't even think you know it, but like, there's this dynamic in the industry, and I've seen many posts from CISOs and security leaders like, "Don't email me, don't message." Like, there's a really distrust among security leaders when it comes to sales teams and marketing folks. And for some of the behaviors you talked about there, how do we change that dynamic to be more collaborative, more cooperative? Like, because there is a lot of great insights some of these folks can share that their research team is doing, or their product that they're innovating on. But it just feels like there's so much tension because of the way that, these poor sales tactics that we see so often.
So I think you just named it right there, which is poor sales tactic. The problem that we have is we've been told everybody sells. I'm going to call bullshit on that. And I'm sorry if this gives you an explicit tag here. Nobody sells unless they're on quota, right? The art of sales, easiest to define, hardest to execute, which is figure out if someone is a buyer. And if so, fleece them for all they're worth and make them happy you did so. That is sales. If they're not a buyer, it's marketing. Now, great sales reps, people who do relationship selling, they're really marketers doing account-based marketing, very heavily targeted at very specific people until they're ready to buy. And what we've done is we've taken marketing activities and we've tried to turn them into sales activities. And sales activities assume the other person is ready to buy. Like, if you're ready to buy and I send you a link that says, hey, come buy, like, that's totally reasonable. Like, you have a need and I send you the link to satisfy your need. Like, you might not love it, but at the end of the day, you're going to click on my link. But if you're not ready to buy and I say, hey, click my link and come buy, you're like, why are you sending me email? I'm not in market. This is what I wanted. And so we need to understand that to be a buyer means that there's a bunch of things that are true for you. You have a location that has a problem that is urgent. You're responsible for solving the problem. Your peers think you're responsible for solving the problem, and your stakeholders want you to solve the problem. That you understand the ways you could solve the problem, this solution is viable, and you have budget. I call these the 9 truths. If you believe these 9 things, you're a buyer. If you don't believe these 9 things, you're not even in market. And the job of marketing is to create a market. It's to convince people of these 9 truths. And so your marketing activities are all about, how do I educate people on these 9 truths in mass so that I end up with more buyers? And that comes back to this, the authority-based selling. That how do I make sure that when people, believe 8 of the truths, I've convinced them of the 9 truths that I'm the viable solution, and they're going to come to me. What we spend a lot of energy on is what I call cultivation, which is how do we take people who are not buyers and sort of hand cultivate them and say, look, I'm going to drag you through the 9 truths personally until you're ready to buy. And I can't pull you through all of them at once. Like, if you've ever been in an argument, with your neighbor about politics, or really a family member about politics, you'll get this. You're only allowed to convince them of one thing, if that. Like, this minute you try to convince them of a second thing, your whole argument falls apart. Same thing happens in sales. And so this is what's happening. You send out cold email, and I think people think that, this current metric I've gotten from talking to so many sales teams is 3%. That's like the high water mark on cold email. If you get 3% to reply to your email, that's considered like best of breed. So think about that for a moment. 3% is the success metric we're using. Okay, what have we defined about the 97%? We've already decided that that's a failed moment because we're not thinking of it as marketing. So every piece of email that you send out needs to be a marketing message that has a sales CTA attached to it. Are you ready for a demo? Click here. But if you're not ready for a demo, so back to your point, here's the piece of research that's interesting. Here's a headline. Here's something in support of one of the truths I need you to believe. Right? If I'm a SaaS vendor, I want to send you a link about why SaaS is important, why the CIO role is going to become part of the CISO role, because SaaS has eliminated 90% of what the CIO does. Right? That's the things you want to be reaching out with and say, oh, by the way, if you'd love a demo, like, we're right here, here's something about us. But be brief, be to the point, make it a brand moment, make it value that you are giving, not value you're trying to take.
Man, I gotta say, I really love how you frame this. It makes, it reiterates how well you understand this space, in my opinion, because I see this, like, I'll see, someone jumps right to a sales tactic, and I'm like, I don't even know who the hell you are or what you do, and then I see other people, like, they're sharing, they're kind of cultivating, like, as you framed it, you can name anything, non-human identity, agentic AI SOC, like, the trends that we see kind of happening right now. People are educating on what this is, why it matters, why you should be concerned with it, how it can help you. And they're kind of cultivating that interest and they're almost creating a category in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And a lot of times,
subsequently becomes a category.
Yeah, that's what you have to do. You have to say, why is it this thing you're not spending money on? It's a thing you're going to have to spend money on, right? Like creating a category, that's all that it is how do I make budget appear?
Yeah, all of a sudden someone has a problem they didn't know they had, and they're like, we really need to solve X. And it's like, you didn't even know what that was a year ago. You've just slowly been pulled through the 9 truths.
Right.
And now you find yourself with a need. I wanted to ask you too, like, I know we throw a lot of, bad vibes towards, marketing and sales folks from the security community and security leaders. But I feel like there's also, in a lot of cases, to your earlier part of your conversation about the CISO, the CEO, the board, those kind of things, there's a lot of times something that CISOs and security practitioners can learn from marketing and sales folks. As you know, like I'm sure a lot of your role in the CISO was being effective communicator, building empathy and building rapport, building relationships. Like sometimes CISOs are great in the weeds and the technical stuff, but they're awful at some of these softer skills. Like, what do you think, some of these things are that, CISOs could learn from their marketing and sales peers?
So one of the things I often tell people when I'm doing a seminar or workshop on like how to cultivate CISOs, like one of the reasons that CISOs rebel against sales and marketing is because they are sales and marketing professionals themselves, but don't want to admit it. And so that's what you have to understand. In the same way that a vendor is trying to sell a solution to you, the CISO, are trying to sell a solution to your company. Right? You're saying we have a location with a problem that is urgent. Like you, developer, you need to fix this. The CEO will care if you don't fix. Like we're walking through the exact same model. And so we need to learn from our marketing professionals. Like, why did I move into marketing in a sense? Is because I had been doing marketing. Right? I recognize that, if I want to sell to an engineer that he has to solve a problem, I'd figure out who the engineer is beholden to. Product is telling the engineer what their priorities are. I can't tell the engineer to reprioritize. I've got to go tell the product people that they have to create space. Like I have to market to the stakeholders of my buyer before I can convince my buyer. So absolutely, like if you're a CISO, you should go sit down with a CMO and you should say, hey, explain to me how marketing works. If you don't have an idea, figure that out. Go talk to every person in marketing, learn their job, learn how to write content, go talk to the content marketers and understand like how do they think about success in marketing? Because there's so much of what we're doing that has a parallel. Like sales is more just a relationship building. I think, we're fortunately as CISOs, we're not getting people to sign contracts with us. Although I do know CISOs who aim down that route, and I'm always like, this is a disaster waiting to happen. Please write the book for me. When you end up failing around that strategy. But no, absolutely, CISOs are sales and marketing professionals.
Yeah, you're spot on in that. Like you're often trying to convince the business why they should give a damn about this. Like, why do I care about this? Like, and you have to kind of take them on that journey of getting them there. I wanted to ask you too, and this is kind of a spicy question, I guess I'd say, or some may, consider it that. Like, there's been some criticisms in the community recently of like, there is relationships between CISOs and product teams and startups and venture, and like, there's some interesting dynamics where like the CISO may be an advisor to the company that he's buying a product from, or and there's these CISO communities out there, and like there's a lot of kind of drama around this topic. But at the same time, we do want these communities to interact with each other, CISOs in the venture community, CISOs in the startup startup community, et cetera. Like, how do we kind of navigate that while keeping things ethical and optics aligned?
Yeah. So I think there's two different axes here you have to address. And I want to focus on it from the CISO perspective for a moment, which is first of all, as a CISO, look, if you are getting financial compensation, even future compensation from anybody who's not your employer, you need to have a conversation with your general counsel. Full stop. Does not matter what the policies are in the company. Go have that conversation, right? Because if you do not have documented that what you're doing is okay, at the end of the day, you bear all of the risk. Because you might think you were in compliance with company policy, but you weren't. And also, like when I became an advisor to a fund 8 years ago when I was a CISO, I went and I sat down with the general counsel and I got approval for it. And we talked about it. He said, look, you're going to have to recuse yourself from any purchase, which did not make the VC happy. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, and just so you know, if I recuse myself, there's no way for one of your companies to win. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, if I recuse myself from a decision, there will be no decision. Like, if I'm not championing a thing, nobody's going to spend money on it. So you've basically blocked us from buying, which is funny. I left as being the CISO, and like 3 of the companies in the portfolio closed deals in the next year. The following CISO and the CIO were all like, oh, this is amazing. You designed exactly for us. Yeah, because Andy was telling them what to build. They built a thing that worked. So that's step one, deal with that. Then the second question you have to say is, like, what is my long-term priority? I know CISOs who just said, look, I will never take compensation from outside of my job, period. And certainly if you're in the financial services sector, you're going to have to do that. And I think that's the easiest approach. It kind of sucks because you're asking CISOs to give of their time. And so that's the way you should really approach this. But it has gotten out of hand. Like, I know of CISO communities that basically within a region, a bunch of CISOs have gotten together and then they sell access to their time. And it's a one step removed. The CISO doesn't take any money. The community takes the money and then they spend it on events for the CISO. So it's like, oh, like bring, you can spend this much money and they'll take all the local CISOs out to dinner and then we'll use the rest of that money to, go take us all out to do a thing. And we're sort of laundering the money. I think there's some questionable things going on there. I think the more you feel like you are able to hide the challenge there, the more likely you might have stepped over the line from, well, it was an innocent mistake to now it's a cognitive one. So we need to, I think about that. On the vendor side, here's the challenge. Like I'm talking with a company right now, working on helping them build out a CISO advisory board. Like, how do you get advisors? And I said, look, if you compensate the advisors, you should expect they're not going to buy from you. They said, well, maybe they still will. And I'm like, you have to walk in and basically say, if I'm compensating them, they're not going to spend money with me. And if you don't believe that, you're going to get yourself in trouble. But more importantly, you will push away the great CISOs who might otherwise be willing to be an advisor. Right now, they might say, I'm happy to take compensation, in which case you should give them something. Like, great, if they're willing to take your money, but you can't walk in expecting that.
Yeah, I really love the framing there around the clearing of expectations, right? Like you said, you might eliminate them as being a buyer, but if it's the right CISO, right security leader, they're going to provide enough information, enough value, enough insights back to you that's worth, kind of writing off that one organization as a buyer for now. And maybe down the road when they move on, that changes, as you point out, that can happen. But just clearing up those expectations from the onset is so critical, I think, to kind of keeping this, the optics of this from not seeming slimy and dirty.
And certainly, look, if you've got a couple CISOs like that in your sort of envelope as a vendor, and one of them leaves the company and they're going to take like 4 months off, give them money then. You should say, hey, look, do you want to come to our headquarters for 2 weeks? Like, we just want you in the office a couple days, take a vacation, bring your family. Like, this is the compensation I will give you. Is while you're not employed, I'll take care of you. And then when you go get another job, like, I'm not going to even say, well, I expect you to listen. We all know what the quid pro quo is now you're a friend. And so when I say, hey, what's the opportunity look like for me to sell to you? I can just have a straightforward conversation about that.
Yeah, clearing that up in advance is so critical. We talked about leadership throughout this conversation. And I know you've put a lot of thought, quote unquote, leadership on the topic of leadership. Not to reuse the word there, but as you've moved through security practitioner, you've been in the military, you've been an investor, you've been an advisor, you've held all these different hats and roles that you've had. What are some fundamental leadership principles that you kind of carry with you, regardless of the role that you're in? You've kind of touched on throughout the conversation too.
Yeah. Well, first of all, love the question. For those who aren't watching on a video, like I've got 1% Leadership, the book I wrote on leadership right behind me. Here's my single biggest takeaway. Leadership is a skill set. It's not a cult. And too many people approach it like a cult or a religion where they say, look, there's just this one truth you have to believe. And as long as you do this, you will be an amazing leader, right? Sounds like a lot of religions out there. And that's not to say you can't be a good leader doing something like that if you're in the right place in the right time. But mostly leadership is like any other discipline. It's a set of skills that you have to know which one to apply where. And that's the single biggest thing, is that the skill you will apply today is the wrong skill to apply tomorrow. So anytime that you say, this is my one rule of being a leader, then you're going to have days that you're a bad leader. Right? Servant leaders are not execution leaders, right? They're not mission oriented because they're human oriented, right? There are days you need to be a servant leader, but there's days you need to be a mission oriented leader, and you need to learn how to blend these two. So I captured a lot of mine. One of my favorite ones is, on the topic of inclusion, which, lately these days, it feels like with the fall of DEI and in some places, and the dogmatic hold on, and in other places, inclusion sometimes feels like a dirty word. But I think inclusion is one of the most important core philosophies for great leadership. And I define inclusion very simply. It's reducing the energy cost people pay just to exist in a space. That if you can figure out how to do that, because all that leadership really is converting energy into value. You have people, they have energy, some of it you get, you're going to take that energy and make value. So the more of that energy that you waste up front by making them feel excluded, the less value you're going to get out of them. It's that simple. And I had a friend who worked for me who said, look, I always think of it as there's the angel leader on one shoulder and the devil leader on the other shoulder. And the angel tells you to do right by your people, and the devil tells you to do right by your employer. And when they both tell you to do the same thing, that's great leadership. And so my definition for inclusion is really focused on that. Take care of the people. Don't hurt the people by making them waste energy, and maximize your employer's value by not wasting the energy of your people. Like you have aligned these things together beautifully.
I can't help but go back to your earlier part of the conversation where you mentioned vampires, because when you're saying energy, I'm thinking of, kind of bloodsuckers, right? Like it's like they're expending energy to just show up in the workspace, where instead of just feeling comfortable and like they feel included there and naturally, capable of being themselves, they can provide the value to the company versus just trying to do things to feel like they're part of the organization or part of the team. They're going out of their way, expending energy that could be better spent making the company more profitable or productive.
Yep. Yeah. Like, look, I have dietary restrictions. There's foods I just can't or won't eat. And I have, event planners that I completely trust, that I know that if this person's planning the event, I don't even have to mention my dietary restrictions because it'll be taken care of. Like I will show up and I will have a first-class meal. When I was at Wild, Guy Cohen, who, was the, head of the office management, business partnerships, she was in charge of this. So I'd go to Israel and like, I would show up at an event. I didn't know what was going on. I'd walk in and she'd be like, Andy, come here. Let me walk you over to the chef. For every catered event, this is the chef. The chef will make sure you're taken care of. The chef would walk me through what I could eat, what foods they would be delivering me. I would be stuffed by the end of the event. I was never hungry. And at some point I'd be like, stop feeding me. I'd have other events I would go to. And certainly when I was at Akamai, one of the event coordinators for engineering, whose attitude was like, why do you think you get special treatment? Like we have already decided that these are the meals we're having. And we have 3 special meals. And they said, oh, you're a vegetarian. And I'm like, no, I'm not a vegetarian. What part of can't eat dairy matches with vegetarian? And so like, I knew that I would never be able to eat at those events. And so now and it was like, there'd be an event. And I'd be like, do I even bother having a conversation? Like I'm wasting energy. I'm a C-level executive burning energy thinking about food. Like this makes no sense. And this happens. Like you talk to women in the workforce and they're like, if I walk into a room and I'm the only woman in the room, I'm wondering how long it will take for somebody to ask me to go get coffee. And even if like it's been 10 years since the last time that happened, they're still wasting energy on that because they don't feel included. That's a problem for us.
Yeah, they carry that with them, and it's distracting them from showing up in the conversations, the interactions, being present and contributing to the event, the organization as a whole. So yeah, really excellent point there. I wanted to ask you, like I said, I've talked about this throughout the conversation. I know you've stepped out, you're doing your own thing now. Can you tell us what you're up to? Where can folks learn more? Where can they learn more about what you're up to here?
Sure. So people can find me. I'll start with that at duha, duha.co. No M at the end. I go for the nice 6 letters there. So that's my website. So I'm doing independent consulting, value add, both on the CISO side. So you want to, mentor, talk to somebody about that. How do you, go talk to the board? I also publish howtociso.com. And so those are CISO oriented resources. But for, vendors, a lot of what I'm doing is, how do I do small workshops? Come in, either help you refine your messaging, figure out what your truths are, sit down, come to your sales kickoff or your marketing readiness summit, talk to your, go-to-market teams, those, SDRs, field marketers, the folks everybody takes for granted, but who have the hardest job in the industry. Give them not only like, here's how to think about it, but then the opportunity to talk to a CISO. They can ask questions, actually hear ready feedback. And then also doing keynotes. So I'm doing a talk at a conference coming up for a vendor, come in and do keynotes on leadership, decision making. I think this is going to be how AI is going to change how we make decisions differently in the security world.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate you jumping on. Like I said, we've really run the gamut of everything from cybersecurity leadership, investing, advising, go-to-market and sales teams, you name it. Andy, I've respected your thought leadership in this space for quite some time. I hope folks enjoy the conversation, and I'll definitely put links to your resources out there, your books, your website, et cetera, in the show notes. So thanks so much for jumping on, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Take care.